The North had two kinds of darkness, the one that came each evening, and the one that never left. For the Vikings, night was not a simple absence of light. It was a living thing. Thick, breathing and sentient. It crept into every corner of the Longhouse, seeped between the timbers, and coiled around the sleeping. When the fire in the hearth sank to its last embers, the shadows seemed to move, of their own accord. They whispered against the roof beams. They listened. To live in the North was to be surrounded by silence that could shatter your mind if you listened too long. The winds carried voices that weren't there. The ice cracked like footsteps. Even the aurora, that shifting green fire in the sky, looked like souls moving between worlds. And when the time came to sleep, a Viking did not simply rest. He entered a borderland between worlds, a place the living and the dead both wandered. To close one's eyes in such a place requires faith, or perhaps madness, because the Norse people believed that sleep and death shared the same road. Only one returned at dawn. They called the night Not, a goddess born from giants, whose very body gave birth to day. She rode across the sky in a chariot, pulled by a dark horse, whose mane dropped dew upon the earth. When the sun vanished, it wasn't gone. It had been devoured by her shadow. So when a Viking lay down to sleep, he lay in her embrace, beneath her dark hair, beneath her power. And not everyone woke when she passed. Inside the longhouses, people slept close together, not from affection, but survival. Heat meant life. The breath of others was your shield against the cold. The walls groaned as frost bit into the wood. Outside, wolves sang to the moon, and snow fell so silently that it seemed the world itself had stopped breathing. Every creak could be an intruder. Every gust could be a spirit. To the Viking mind, the night was not empty. It was full. Full of the unseen. Full of ancestors who still walked. Full of gods who preferred to whisper rather than speak. There are sagas that tell of people who woke in the middle of the night and saw someone standing over them. Pale, silent, watching. They would reach out and the figure would vanish like mist. The next morning, someone in the household would be dead. Coincidence meant little in the Viking age. Everything was a sign, everything was a pattern. And the dreams that followed, those strange visitations of beasts, floods and burning halls, were messages from that same realm that pressed against the walls while they slept. For Vikings, to dream was not fantasy, it was contact. Sleep was the one time the mind loosened its grip on the waking world, the moment when your Hugr, your soul mind, could wander. They believed it could leave the body, travelling through the night like smoke. Sometimes it returned with warnings, sometimes it didn't return at all. And so people feared deep sleep, that kind of unguarded surrender when you felt yourself fall endlessly inward. It felt too close to dying. Fathers would stoke the fire before bed, not just for warmth, but for protection. The flame was a barrier between the world of men and the world that pressed in from beyond. Smoke curling upward was not simply the mark of burning wood. It was a prayer in motion, an offering to keep the dark things satisfied. Mothers told their children not to sleep with their feet toward the door. That was the path spirits used. Warriors, even the fiercest, kept charms of iron or bone beside their heads to keep their dreams pure. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. There are stories of men who woke screaming in the night, unable to move, feeling a crushing weight on their chest. The mare, the Mara, sitting on them, feeding on their breath. Their eyes open but their bodies frozen, hearts pounding beneath invisible fingers. The Mara was not a metaphor. She was a presence, and she came to those who carried guilt. No one could explain it. The paralysis, the terror, but they all knew it was real. For the Vikings, to sleep was to cross a threshold, and to dream was to step into another world entirely. They had no clocks, no artificial light, no barriers between waking and dreaming. The night lasted long enough to live a lifetime inside it. Those who survived winter knew that the body could endure cold, hunger, and isolation. But it was the mind, the endless night, that tested the soul. In those months of darkness, when dawn was a rumour and the stars hung like silent witnesses, people spoke of dreams that didn't feel like dreams at all. Dreams where the dead returned to finish their sentences, where gods appeared as strangers, where animals spoke with human voices. And when morning came, if it came, they didn't ask, "What does it mean?" They asked, "Who sent it?" The line between waking and sleeping was never clear. Many Norse people believed that the same forces that ruled dreams ruled fate. The same weavers who spun the threads of life could pull the strings of your sleep. And so each night was a quiet surrender, a gamble. Because when you laid your head down in the Viking world, you didn't know if you were falling into rest or falling into the realm of gods and ghosts. Sleep to them was not the opposite of life. It was its reflection, distorted, darker, and perhaps more honest. When the sagas speak of heroes who dreamed before battle, or women who foresaw death in their sleep, these were not poetic flourishes. They were records of encounters. The Vikings believed the night spoke to them, through symbols, through fear, through memory. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all is that they listened. Some warriors claimed that before great raids, Odin himself would visit them in their dreams. Sometimes he appeared as a grey wanderer, one eye hidden, offering words that twisted like smoke. Other times he came as an eagle or a shadow. Those who received his dream gifts were never the same. They became wild, fearless, cursed with knowledge no man should bear. To dream of Odin was to be chosen, or doomed. And so the night became a place of testing, a proving ground for the soul. Even the bravest feared sleep, because courage meant little against what waited behind your eyelids. You could face a blade, a storm, a beast. But how do you fight your own mind when it becomes the battlefield? When the world outside the Longhouse was locked in ice, the true war began. The war between the self and the shadow. That is what the Vikings understood better than us. That survival was not only of the body, but of the dream. They didn't escape their fears through distraction or denial. They faced them, every night, under furs heavy with frost, eyes flickering between light and dark, waiting to see which side would claim them by morning. And when the dawn finally bled through the cracks of the wooden walls, those who woke didn't speak of peace. They spoke of what they had seen, because in the Viking world sleep wasn't rest. It was a nightly encounter with the gods, and sometimes with themselves. The Vikings believed that a person was not one being, but many. You were a body, yes, of bone, flesh and breath, but you were also a storm of unseen parts. The Hugr, your mind, your will, your soul's thought. The Hamr, your shape, your form. The skin your spirit could change. And the Fylgja, your follower, your shadow companion that walked beside you through life and into death. To sleep was to loosen the bonds that held all these pieces together. Each night the Vikings believed the soul grew restless, slipping away from the body to wander. They saw dreams not as fantasies of the mind, but as journeys of the self. The body remained behind, breathing faintly under the furs, while another part of you, your Hugr, travelled far beyond what waking eyes could see. Some said it rode on the wind, others claimed it took animal form, a wolf, a bear, a bird, gliding through forests or over the sea. If you dreamed of flying, it was not metaphor, it was memory. You had flown, and that was both wondrous and terrifying, because when your Hugr wandered, you were vulnerable. If it failed to return by dawn, your body would never wake. There were stories, quiet, half-whispered around winter fires, of those who slept peacefully one night and were found cold the next morning, their faces serene, eyes open as if still watching a dream. People said their souls had simply gone too far, that they had crossed into the land of spirits and forgotten the way back. The Vikings had no word for subconscious, but they understood it in their bones. They felt that dreams were the truest reflection of what lived inside a person. Not just thoughts, but the shape of their spirit. A warrior who dreamed of wolves was not merely afraid, he was becoming one. A woman who dreamed of drowning might not be dying, but cleansing or preparing for rebirth. And when a seeress dreamed, the whole village listened, because dreams were never private. They belonged to the community, to the gods, to the threads of fate that wove all lives together. To ignore a dream was to ignore a message, and messages came from everywhere, from ancestors, from spirits, from the Norns who measured the span of every life. The Norse sagas are full of such moments. A chieftain sees his hall collapse in his sleep, and wakes to find his lineage about to fall. A woman dreams of blood filling her hands, and by sunset, her husband has been slain. A farmer dreams of fire, and lightning strikes his barn the next morning. Coincidence, we might say. But to them, coincidence was simply fate wearing a disguise. They lived in a world without noise, without electric light, without distraction. When they closed their eyes, the darkness was absolute. The imagination became the only landscape left to explore. And so their dreams grew larger than life. The Vikings spoke of Hamr, shape journeys. The belief that one's Hamr could separate from the body and travel while the person slept or fell into trance. There are tales of warriors who took the shapes of bears or wolves, stalking enemies miles away, only to wake exhausted and bloodstained. Whether these were legends or something stranger, no one could say. But they believed it, and belief in the Viking world was reality given form. Sometimes the Hugr could even appear to others. A man might see his friend's likeness standing at his door, pale and silent, only to learn the next day that the friend had died in his sleep. This was not seen as ghostly. It was the soul announcing its departure, politely saying farewell before the road to Helheim. And then there was the Fylgja, perhaps the most mysterious of all. The word means follower. Every person, they said, had one, a spirit that mirrored your fate and essence. It could appear in human form or as an animal, often one that reflected your character. The Fylgja of a warrior might be a wolf or a hawk. The Fylgja of a healer might be a white hare or a swan. The Fylgja of a seeress, something even less nameable. It lived alongside you, invisible, watching. And sometimes when you dreamed, you became it. To see your Fylgja in a dream was both a blessing and a warning. It meant that your spirit self had revealed itself, a reminder that you were more than flesh. But it also meant that fate was stirring. The Fylgja often appeared before death, not as an omen of doom, but as a guide preparing you for the road beyond life. Many Vikings claimed that when they dreamed of certain animals, repeatedly, it was because their Fylgja was restless. It wanted to speak. It wanted to prepare them. And if ignored, it could turn against them, leaving them hollow, spiritless, cursed with nightmares that never ended. The soul was not something you had. It was something you maintained, a fragile balance between the seen and unseen. When the Vikings spoke of courage, they didn't only mean bravery in battle. They meant the courage to sleep, to let your Hugr drift through a landscape of gods and ghosts, knowing it might bring back truths too heavy for daylight. They believed that certain people could control their dreams, steer their souls like ships through the mist. These were the seers, the dreamwalkers, the ones who could send their Hugr across distance and time. A skilled Völva could enter sleep deliberately to seek knowledge from the dead. Through chanting, herbs and rhythmic drumming, she would loosen her spirit's bindings and descend. Her body would remain motionless, her breath shallow, her hands trembling as if on another shore. And when she awoke, she would speak in riddles, words that seemed like madness but later proved true. Even kings sought such women, because dreams were as real as any battlefield, and the gods spoke most clearly through them. The idea that the soul could travel while sleeping wasn't strange to the Vikings. It was survival. How else could they explain the vivid, prophetic nature of dreams that later unfolded in life exactly as seen? To them, the world itself was layered. Midgard for the living, Helheim for the dead, Asgard for the divine, and countless in-betweens. Sleep was simply the body's way of crossing those thresholds. And it wasn't just humans who dreamed. They believed animals did too. and sometimes their dreams were warnings for the people who kept them. If a cow lowed restlessly at night, if a dog barked at an empty corner, if ravens gathered on the roof, someone in the household would soon face fate's hand. In their cosmology, everything was connected. The soul of a man could echo in the soul of a bird. The cry of the wind could carry the thought of the gods. Dreams were part of that web, threads woven by unseen hands. That's why the Vikings didn't separate myth from mind. The dream world was sacred ground. The way a Christian might kneel in prayer, a Viking lay down to dream, to meet his gods, his fears, his ancestors. And they feared it because truth was rarely kind. A dream might reveal betrayal before it happened. It might show the face of one's killer. It might whisper that your harvest would fail, that your child would not live through winter. But to ignore the vision was to invite disaster. So they listened. They analysed the symbols, consulted the wise, and offered sacrifices to change what fate had shown. There was power in knowing, but there was also a cost. Because when you live in a world where dreams are real, the line between vision and madness grows thin. Many Norsemen described recurring nightmares, a black shape pressing upon their chests, voices calling their names, endless falling into a pit that never hit bottom. Today we might call it sleep paralysis, anxiety, or trauma. But to them it was the Hugr, struggling to return, trapped between realms. And so rituals developed, sleeping with runes under one's pillow, hanging herbs above the bed, whispering prayers to Frigg or Freya for protection. They were not trying to stop dreams, only to survive them. The Vikings lived close to death, and because of that, they lived close to their dreams. They believed both belonged to the same cycle. Every night was a small death, and every morning a resurrection. Each dream was a rehearsal for the final crossing. In the long winters, when snow buried the doors and the sky refused to turn blue, people said the boundary between worlds wore thin. It was then that dreams grew strongest and most dangerous. Some refused to sleep at all during those nights, fearful of what they might see. Others welcomed it, lighting candles and calling to their ancestors to speak through the veil. They were not naive. They knew sleep could kill as easily as comfort. But they believed that to live without dreaming was to die before death. The Hugr had to wander. It was how the soul kept its strength. And those who never dreamed, or who forgot their dreams, were pitied, seen as people whose spirits had gone dull, disconnected from the weave of life. To the Viking, the self was not a single flame, but a hearth of many fires. Sleep scattered them, dreams gathered them again. That is why they feared their sleep, not because it brought darkness, but because it brought revelation. Dreams did not lie. They revealed who you truly were when the world went silent. And so each night, as the fire dimmed and the air turned to frost, a Viking closed his eyes, knowing that what awaited was not rest, but a journey through forests unseen, over seas of memory, toward gods who never slept. To dream in the Viking age was to receive a message. The gods did not write on stone, they wrote on sleep. When the Sagas speak of visions, they never sound surprised. No Viking doubted that the night could speak, only whether they were brave enough to listen. Dreams could warn of danger, reveal betrayal, or foretell the shape of fate long before it arrived. They came not as whispers, but as storms, violent, unforgettable, drenched in blood and symbol. Some men built their lives around them. Others lost their minds trying to escape them. In the Sagas, a dream is never just a dream. It's the shadow of destiny moving before dawn. The Icelandic word for dream, drama, carried the same weight as vision. To dream was not something that happened to you. It was something that happened through you. You were not the author. You were the messenger. And the messenger could be punished for the message he carried. One of the oldest tales of dream prophecy comes from the Völva saga, the great legend that gave birth to the myth of the dragon slayer Seiðr. In it, Queen Gudrun dreams of her husband-to-be, Sigurd, but the dream is twisted. She sees him as a radiant man, wearing a golden helm, riding a powerful horse. But soon the horse stumbles, and the man falls, pierced through by a spear. When she tells the dream, the wise interpret it as love and tragedy intertwined. The man she will marry will bring her joy and sorrow in equal measure. The dream came true. Sigurd died by treachery, and Gudrun lived on, haunted by her own foresight. To the Vikings, such stories weren't entertainment. They were warnings, lessons about the cost of knowing. Because if a dream revealed your fate, you could not change it. Only endure it with dignity. In the Eagle's saga, the warrior poet Egil Skallagrimsson, one of the most vivid figures of the Viking world, is tormented by dreams before his battles. He sees himself standing alone in a dark field, surrounded by ravens tearing at corpses. When he wakes, he takes it as a sign from Odin, the ravens being the god's messengers, choosing who will die that day. And yet Egil rides into battle anyway, because to ignore the dream would be to deny his bond with the divine. It was not fear that the dream brought, but inevitability. Dreams were not meant to comfort, they were meant to prepare. In Norse belief, even the gods dream, and those dreams echo through all the worlds. Odin himself was said to sleep rarely, if ever, but when he did, the 9 realms trembled. He dreamed not of peace, but of the end, of wolves devouring the sun, of fire swallowing the sky, of his own death at Ragnarok. And still, he sought every scrap of knowledge to delay that fate. The Vikings saw themselves in him. To dream was to see beyond what was safe. And yet they kept dreaming, because ignorance was the greater terror. The sagas often open with dreams, because dreams were the beginning of every story. A dream might send a man to sea. A dream might warn a woman of betrayal. A dream might make a king paranoid enough to start a war. Take the tale of King Harald Fairhair, who united Norway. Before one of his greatest victories, his mother dreamed of a great tree growing from his son's hair, its branches spreading across the land, its roots drinking from every fjord. The dream foretold his reign, vast and unshakable. But at the end of the vision, the tree burned, a reminder that power always comes with its own ending. Dreams were the language of gods who refused to speak plainly. They loved riddles, symbols, and illusions. A Viking might dream of waves swallowing a mountain, only to find his family drowned in a flood weeks later, or dream of a serpent coiled around his hand, and wake to find himself betrayed by a friend. Everything was connected, nothing was coincidence. In the saga of the Ynglings, a warrior named Aun dreams of a man who tells him that for every decade he lives, he must sacrifice one of his sons. He wakes in horror, but as the years pass, the dream becomes prophecy. Each time Arn grows old, another son dies, until he's left a frail relic, kept alive by the blood of his lineage. Dreams did not lie. They waited. Even Ragnar Lothbrok, the most mythic of Viking heroes, lived and died by dreams. In one story, his wife Aslaug dreams of a serpent coiled around her unborn child. When she tells Ragnar, he laughs, but when the boy is born, he has a mark across his eyes like the ring of a snake. They name him Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and he becomes one of the greatest warriors in Norse legend. Dreams shaped bloodlines, decisions, wars. But perhaps the most haunting are the dreams of those who foresaw their own deaths. In the Laxdæla saga, a woman named Gudrun Osvif's daughter, wise, tragic, and endlessly introspective, dreams 4 times before choosing her husband. Each dream shows her wearing a different headpiece, a sign of the 4 marriages she will endure. Each one ends in sorrow. She interprets them calmly, almost coldly, as if she knows that love, in the north, always comes dressed as loss. Her dreams were not nightmares, they were instructions from fate, and so she lived with them. Even when she grew old, blind and weary, she was asked once, "Who did you love the most?" She smiled faintly and said, "I was the worst to the one I loved the most." Every Viking saga is built upon such fatalism. Dreams were not something to resist. They were the fabric of destiny, revealing itself one thread at a time. And yet, despite their fear, the Vikings also sought these visions. They believed that wisdom lived where fear did. To know one's fate was painful, but to walk blind was worse. The Völva, the Seeresses, was often called upon to interpret these dreams. Her eyes seemed to see through walls. When she entered trance, her voice became strange, half hers, half someone else's. People came from miles around to tell her what they had dreamed. She would listen in silence, stirring the fire, then speak slowly. "You dreamed not of blood, but of time." Or, "The wolf you saw was not an enemy. It was yourself." Her interpretations were not literal. They were psychological before psychology had a name. The Norse mind understood symbols as truth, that the soul spoke in images because words were too small. In many sagas, dreams arrive on the night before a great battle. The air becomes heavy. The warriors grow quiet. Some wake trembling, others pray. But all understand the same thing. The gods have already chosen. They didn't dream for comfort. They dreamed of instruction. They dreamed to learn how to meet their deaths well. One haunting tale from the Njal saga tells of Flosi, a man who dreams that he climbs a mountain and sees a great hall shining in the distance. Inside, his dead comrades feast. He hears them calling his name. When he wakes, he knows what it means. His time is coming. He tells no one, but begins to prepare his affairs. Weeks later, he is killed in battle, exactly as foretold. To the Vikings, this wasn't tragedy. It was completion. To dream of death and then meet it with calm was the mark of a man who understood the weave of the world. There is a quiet dignity in that kind of fatalism, a strength that modern minds rarely grasp. Because the Norse didn't believe in escaping fate. They believed in walking toward it, eyes open, and dreams were the torches lighting that path. Even the ordinary people, farmers, fishers, slaves, treated dreams with reverence. They would wake and recount them aloud by the morning fire, letting the elders interpret. A red sky might mean blood. A broken oar might mean a failed voyage. A bird landing on one's shoulder might mean protection or doom, depending on its colour. Interpretation was never certain. Dreams were not equations. They were negotiating with the unknown. Sometimes the gods disguised themselves as dream messengers, appearing not as thunder or flame, but as subtle figures in the mind's theatre. Odin, the bringer of inspiration. Freya, the comforter of the grieving. Hel, the silent one who appeared at the edge of nightmares, waiting without malice. Each god used dreams as language, because mortals could not bear their voices while awake. And so every night, humanity became their audience, sleeping under firs, listening without knowing. Dreams were both gifts and weapons. They could bless a man with foresight, or break him with truth too heavy to hold. A single dream could drive a king to paranoia, turn a lover into a murderer, or guide a wanderer across the sea. Even when Christianity reached the north, the old dreamcraft lingered. The new priests told them that visions came from angels or demons, but the people still heard Odin's whisper in the wind. They still believed that sleep was sacred ground. To this day, the sagas preserve those ancient dreams like fossils, still warm with meaning, each one a glimpse into how the Norse saw existence. Not as random, but woven. Not as rational, but alive. They knew that dreams spoke in riddles because truth itself does. And perhaps they were right, because even now, when we dream of falling or running or meeting those long dead, we feel that same ancient tug between fear and meaning. We wake, breathless, heart pounding, as if something just tried to speak. The Vikings would tell us, it did. We've just forgotten how to listen. For them, dreams were not shadows of the day. They were the dawn of understanding, a nightly conversation between the soul and whatever waited beyond the stars. And though they feared their sleep, they also revered it. Because in that darkness they met their gods, their ghosts and their truth. Night in the north had its own kind of silence, not empty, but full. It pulsed with wind, breath, and the slow heartbeat of the fire. Inside the Longhouse the flames bent low, whispering through the cracks of birch logs. The air smelled of smoke, wool, and the faint sweetness of drying herbs hung from the beams. Outside, frost clung to the walls like a second skin. Inside, people sat close together, wrapped in furs, eyes reflecting orange light. This was how they passed the longest hours, telling dreams. It was not entertainment, it was a ritual. Every flicker of the firelight was a pulse between worlds, warmth against the void, light against the unknown. And in that thin space between comfort and fear, people spoke. A woman spoke first. Her voice was low, unhurried. She said she had dreamed of a river running backward, of fish swimming through the air, their silver bellies gleaming like blades. The old man beside her nodded slowly. He told her that it was a good dream, that the river was time, and to see it flow backward meant that something lost would return. The others murmured their approval. No one doubted the interpretation. In the north, meaning was always near the surface. A young boy leaned forward, eyes wide. He said he had dreamed of a bear standing at the doorway, not attacking, just watching. A silence followed. Then one of the men, a hunter, said quietly, "That's not the bear you saw. It's the one that will see you." The boy swallowed hard and nodded. The others looked into the fire, thinking of all the things that watched them from the dark. Across the hall, an old woman with long grey hair and missing teeth began to hum softly. A tune no one recognised, but everyone felt. She said it came from her dream, that in the dream she had stood on the shore of a frozen lake, and the ice beneath her had sung. She didn't understand the words, but she remembered the sound. She said it felt like forgiveness. The people listened. Even the children went quiet. For a moment it seemed the fire burned brighter, as if the dream itself had joined them. This was how they survived the endless nights, by keeping the invisible alive through speech. Each story was a small fire of its own, a way of warming the mind against the cold of uncertainty. Dreams were not secrets. They belonged to the group. A dream unspoken could fester, twist, or turn against its dreamer. But a dream shared was tamed. It became part of the tribe's map of the unseen. After the old woman's song faded, a tall man with scars across his neck spoke. He said he had dreamed of standing on a field of ash, and from the smoke he saw his father walking toward him, though his father had been dead for 5 winters. He said he felt neither fear nor comfort, only a question he couldn't ask. The Völva, who had been silent all evening, lifted her head. Her eyes glinted in the firelight. She said, "Then the question is your inheritance." The man frowned. "What do I do with it?" She smiled faintly. "Live with it." The hall went quiet again. Only the crackle of the wood answered. Someone added more logs to the fire, and sparks rose into the rafters like small stars. Outside, the wind shifted, a low, constant moan threading through the smoke hole above them. A few people glanced upward, uneasy. The Völva closed her eyes and whispered, "The wind remembers." Another woman spoke, younger this time, her voice trembling slightly. She said she had dreamed of giving birth to a snake that crawled from her arms and disappeared into the sea. The others stared. The Völva did not flinch. She said softly, "Then your child will carry wisdom that frightens others." The woman's face relaxed, as if she had been waiting to hear that all her life. That was how dream meaning worked here. Not as prediction, but as transformation. You didn't interpret it to control the future. You interpreted it to make peace with it. For a while no one spoke. The fire burned low. Some people began to drift into sleep, their bodies sinking into the warmth, their breaths rising like mist. Others stared at the embers, lost in their own unspoken visions. Then the Völva began to speak again, not to anyone in particular, but to the room itself. She said, "When you sleep, you do not leave this place. You go deeper into it. The ground remembers you. The air holds your name. When you wake, you carry pieces of that world in your eyes. That is why we tell dreams, so that we may all remember what we saw there." Her words fell like ash, slow, weightless, final. Outside, the aurora flickered across the sky, green fire dancing above black snow. Inside, the last log split in two, revealing a hidden vein of light that glowed blue-white before fading. No one spoke again. The night was listening. and in the silence something felt complete, as if the dreams, spoken aloud, had sealed the walls of the Longhouse against the cold. The Vikings did not use the word nightmare lightly. To them the night was already dangerous, but the nightmare was something worse. It was not a dream. It was an attack. They called it the Mara, a shadow being that came while you slept, pressing down upon your chest, feeding on your breath. It slipped through cracks, through keyholes, through the smallest space between wall and beam. You would wake in the dark, frozen, eyes wide open, unable to move, and you would feel it. The weight, the stare, the suffocating presence. It was never seen clearly, only felt, and that made it more real than anything visible. The Mara was the whisper at the edge of every longhouse. Parents warned children not to sleep alone, not to lie on their backs, not to let their feet point toward the door, because that was the path spirits used. When a man woke up gasping in the night, trembling, drenched in sweat, the others did not comfort him. They listened, because what visited him might return. To the modern world, it sounds like sleep paralysis, the body waking before the mind, trapped between dreaming and consciousness. But to the Vikings, that explanation would have sounded far too small. For them, the Mara was not in the head, it was in the room. They said she was once human, a witch, a cursed soul, or a woman's restless spirit that escaped her body at night. She came through walls like smoke. She rode on sleeping men, as if on a horse. She left them weak, pale, drained, and if you dreamed of her often, it meant something within you had attracted her. Guilt, fear, unspoken crimes. Because the Mara came to those with heavy hearts. The Vikings did not separate morality from the supernatural. They believed your deeds shaped what visited you in the dark. If you broke an oath, shed innocent blood, or mocked the gods, you marked yourself, and the Mara would know your scent. But the Mara was not the only terror that crept into Viking sleep. There were the Draugr, the dead who refused to stay dead. Unlike the ghosts of later folklore, the Draugr had bodies, swollen blue-black, heavy with death. They lived in their burial mounds, guarding their treasures, hating the living. And sometimes they came at night, not walking but drifting, half flesh, half fog. To dream of a Draugr was to invite him. If you saw one in your sleep, it meant he had noticed you. And if he noticed you, he might soon visit while you slept. The sagas are full of such accounts. In Grettir's saga, the hero Grettir the Strong faces a Draugr named Glamour, a shepherd who died in winter and rose again. When Grettir finally kills the monster, Glamour curses him, that he will forever fear the dark. And from that night on, Grettir sleeps with a candle burning beside him, a warrior terrified of nightfall. His strength remains, but his courage is eaten away by that curse. It is one of the most human moments in all Norse literature, the mighty brought low not by blade, but by dread. The Draugr haunted both sleep and waking life. They were the perfect nightmare, real enough to touch, yet born of death's shadow. Some could grow to giant size, others slipped through dreams, whispering promises. Their presence explained what logic could not. Sudden deaths, madness, illness, the feeling of being watched in the night. The Vikings saw sleep as the border between life and death, and the Draugr were those who had crossed it once and refused to go back. To dream of them was to feel that border thinning. In those dreams the dead spoke. They came to reclaim something. A sword, a treasure, a secret, or to accuse. If you wronged the dead, they would come to remind you. The living feared not only their wrath, but their truth, because the dead remembered everything. To sleep beside a burial mound was madness, but sometimes warriors did it deliberately, hoping to see visions, to prove their courage, or to receive wisdom from the other side. Those who returned never slept easily again. Some described voices in the wind that called their names at night. Others claimed that their own dreams were being watched, as if unseen eyes were studying what they saw. It was not paranoia to them. It was the nature of existence. The North was alive. Every gust, every flicker of shadow, every creak of the timbers was inhabited by something. And when the night pressed close, that something pressed closer. Many Norse burial rites were designed to keep the dead asleep. Iron nails were driven into corpses or laid across the chest to pin the spirit down. Doors were made smaller, so the body had to be dragged through, confusing it so it would not find its way back. Sometimes the dead were buried with their faces downward, so that if they awoke, they would dig deeper into the earth instead of up toward the sky. These weren't superstitions to them, they were acts of survival, because the Vikings knew the dead did not always rest, and neither did the living who dreamed of them. When you live so close to death, when your winters kill whole villages, when war is a season like any other, you begin to sense the world differently. Life and death are not opposites, they are neighbours, and the door between them is very thin. Every night, as the Vikings closed their eyes, they brushed against that door. Sometimes it stayed shut, sometimes it opens a crack. Those who dreamed of their ancestors often felt their presence as warmth, a grandmother's voice, and a father's hand. But those who dreamed of strangers, of pale faces or voices calling from far away, feared what it meant. Was it the Mara, a Draugr, or something worse, something without a name? The Sagas speak of people waking to find frost on their chests in the shape of hands, or seeing footprints of ash near the hearth, leading nowhere. Signs that something had visited, that the world had not been empty while they slept. The Mara and the Draugr were two sides of the same terror, that the night was not yours alone, that your body might lie there, warm and breathing, but your soul was not safe. And yet even these horrors were woven into belief. The Vikings did not run from the dark. They faced it. They made sense of it through ritual, symbol, and story. Fear to them was not weakness. It was wisdom. It told you where the boundaries lay. A nightmare might reveal what the gods wanted you to confront. Guilt, grief, unfinished business. And if you could face it, you could live freer. So when a Viking woke from terror, gasping, heart racing, he might sit in silence by the fire, staring into the embers, whispering what he saw. Not to banish it, but to understand it. They believed that if you spoke a nightmare aloud, you robbed it of power. If you kept it secret, it would grow. Some households had night tellers, elders who listened to bad dreams and offered meanings. If a woman dreamed of drowning, they would say, "You are carrying too much grief. Pour water tomorrow upon the ground and let it drain away." If a man dreamed of fire consuming his home, they would tell him, "Something in you burns for change. Do not resist it." Even their worst terrors were treated as maps, guides through the unseen. But sometimes even interpretation fails. There were dreams that left people hollow, trembling, unable to speak. Dreams that felt too real, that showed not symbols, but scenes, places they had never been, people they had never met. And weeks later, when those scenes unfolded exactly as dreamed, no one doubted what it meant. It was the soul's warning, and the god's mercy, because to be warned was to be chosen. The Vikings lived with constant reminders of mortality, the cold, the hunger, the violence. Their minds mirrored that landscape. Their dreams became reflections of it. Harsh, stark, unforgiving, but also full of meaning. A modern person might call it trauma. They called it fate made visible. It's easy from the warmth of modern rooms to pity them, to see them as primitive, frightened of shadows. But perhaps they saw something we've lost. They believed the mind was not a prison, but a doorway. Those dreams, even the darkest, connected them to something greater. A universe that still spoke in symbols and signs. In that sense, the Mara and the Draugr were not just monsters. They were the embodiment of conscience. The weight of life's violence pressing back upon those who inflicted it. They were afraid of memory. They were the echo of humanity's oldest guilt. And maybe that's why, for all their horror, the Vikings never stopped sleeping. They knew that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the willingness to face it every night, again and again, until dawn returned. To them, nightmares were part of being alive, because if nothing ever haunted you, it meant you were already dead inside. And so even when the wind howled and the fire died low, when frost crept across the rafters and breath turned to mist, a Viking would close his eyes and surrender once more. Not in ignorance, but in acceptance. The nightmare might come. The Mara might sit upon his chest. The Draugr might whisper his name. But he would endure it, because that was the North's greatest truth. To dream was to suffer. To suffer was to live. And to wake was victory. Not everyone feared their dreams. Some went looking for them. Among the Vikings, a few rare souls walked willingly into the darkness, not to sleep, but to see. They were the Völva, the Seeresses, the dreamwalkers, the women who could step across the border between worlds and return with knowledge the living weren't meant to have. Völva was not born, she was chosen. Her gift often came after sickness, loss or isolation, moments when her spirit broke and never fully returned to the body. What others called madness, the Vikings called sight. She lived apart from the settlement, often in a small hut or tent beyond the fields, close to burial mounds or groves sacred to the gods. People both feared and revered her. They brought offerings of food, silver and cloth in exchange for her visions, and yet few dared to look her directly in the eye, because those eyes were said to have seen too much. The Völva did not simply dream, she travelled. When the night fell and the air grew heavy, she would build a small fire, breathe in herbs that dulled the senses, and begin to sing. Her chant was called Seiðr, a song of weaving, a rhythm that loosened the boundaries between body and spirit. Each note was a thread, pulling her deeper into the unseen. Her breath slowed, her pupils widened, her voice shifted, no longer quite human, as though someone else were speaking through her. The witnesses would sit around the fire in silence, eyes lowered. They knew this was not for spectacle, it was dangerous work, like balancing on the edge of a blade between this world and the next. As she entered trance, her Hugr, her soul mind, slipped free. It roamed the spirit realms seeking answers. Sometimes she spoke in riddles, sometimes she cried out as if struck. The people would ask questions about crops, about war, about their dead, and she would answer with words that sounded like dreams. The sea is calm, but hides its hunger. The child you lost has crossed the river, but watch still. Beware the one who laughs too loudly by your door. Her power came from contact, from touching the realm that others only glimpsed in nightmares. Where ordinary men feared the Mara or the Draugr, the Völva called them by name and made them speak. The Sagas described them vividly. In the saga of Eric the Red, a Völva named Thorbjörg is invited to a settlement struck by famine. She arrives dressed in blue, the colour of twilight, with a staff tipped in bronze and a pouch filled with charms. The people feed her, honour her, and sing the Vardlokker, the warding songs that call the spirits. When she enters trance, her voice echoes like wind over ice. She foretells that the famine will soon end, and the people believe her. Within months it does. To them her words were not guesses, they were reports, messages carried back from the dream world. The Völva's dreams were not personal, like the ones that haunted farmers or warriors. Hers were collective. She dreamed on behalf of the tribe. In many ways she was the psychologist of her age, reading the hidden language of the unconscious, turning terror into meaning, chaos into order. But her knowledge came at a cost. Those who practiced Seiðr were said to grow pale, frail, and distant. They were drained by the visions they carried. Some went mad. Some stopped sleeping altogether, afraid they'd never return if they closed their eyes. And yet without them, the community was blind. When warriors dreamed of blood before battle, they would go to a Völva to ask whether it was a warning or a blessing. When a woman dreamed of drowning, she would ask if it meant loss or birth. And when a man dreamed of a white bear, they'd ask if it was his guardian Fylgja or a death spirit stalking him. The Völva never answered directly. She spoke in symbols, forcing her listeners to look inward, because she knew that dreams were not puzzles to be solved, but mirrors to be faced. Sometimes she would use herbs, henbane, mugwort, datura, and fly agaric mushroom, to open the gates wider. The smoke filled the air with a thick, sweet scent that blurred reality. Some said the gods themselves travelled on that smoke, whispering to her through visions of flame and frost. She might speak of distant lands she had never seen, describing them in exact detail, or she might recount a meeting with a dead ancestor, delivering their last words to the living. No one doubted her, because when she spoke, something in her voice felt older than human. Even Odin himself, the Allfather, was said to have learned Seiðr from a Völva. In the Völuspa, the prophecy of the Seeresses, he wakes a dead woman from her grave to question her about the fate of the gods. She speaks in poetry that burns with vision, of wars among kin, of sons swallowed, of the end of all things. Odin listens not as a god but as a student, because even he, the god of wisdom, needed the voice of dreams to see what lay beyond the horizon. That is how sacred sleep was to them. Even gods sought it, even gods feared it. The line between dreamer and prophet was always thin. Many Völua were believed to dream, even while awake, their eyes unfocused, their voices distant, as if their minds were half in another world. They would speak of seeing threads, silvery cords connecting all beings. They said these threads shimmered when someone lied, or darkened when death approached. To touch them was to alter fate, and that was why Seiðr was both revered and forbidden, because it bent destiny, and those who did so risked being consumed by it. There are accounts of kings who outlawed dream magic, fearing its power, but they still kept Völva secretly in their halls. They needed them, because no amount of iron or gold could protect a man from the truth hidden in his own sleep. Even the warriors who mocked the Seeresses by day would seek them by night, desperate to know if the gods had marked them for death. They wanted to believe in freedom, but they also wanted certainty, and only dreams could offer that. In some villages, a Völva's death was followed by weeks of silence. People said her spirit lingered in the air, watching from the shadows, whispering to the next woman who would take up the staff. The gift never vanished, it only changed hands. Some Völua trained apprentices, teaching them how to breathe slowly until the mind loosened, how to listen to the pulse beneath silence, how to separate the body from the wandering soul. They called it sleeping with purpose. For them, dreaming was not a rest, it was work. Sacred, dangerous work. And yet it was also beautiful. Because to them the dream was the one place where all beings were equal. Gods, men, and the dead could meet in the same space, stripped of rank, bound by vision. The Völva understood something that the rest of her people only felt, that the mind, when unguarded, was a bridge between worlds. And if you dared to cross it, you could bring back fire from the other side. That is why the Vikings treated dreamers with awe. Not because they were mysterious, but because they carried the burden of knowing. A warrior's courage might win him glory in battle, but the dreamer's courage was quieter. It was the bravery to face what others fled from, to look into the endless dark of the self and not flinch. Every civilization has its prophets, but only in the north did prophecy come through frost and fear, through breath and silence, through the trembling voice of one who had just returned from the abyss. The Völva was not simply a fortune teller, she was the keeper of the night's language. And in a world where even kings trembled before their dreams, her voice was the only light they trusted. When she spoke, it was said that even the wind stopped to listen. For the Vikings, the dead were never gone, they were only quieter. In the north, silence carried memory, the creak of a roof beam, the sigh of the wind, the hiss of the fire. All were voices of those who had already crossed over. To dream of them was not strange, it was expected. The boundary between the living and the dead was thin as frost, and every night, when a Viking closed his eyes, he crossed it. They believed that dreams were bridges, shimmering threads between Midgard, the world of men, and Helheim, the realm beneath. In waking life those realms were distant, but in sleep they touched. To dream of the dead was to receive a message, sometimes a warning, sometimes forgiveness. Sometimes only the comfort of presence, the feeling that someone you loved still watched, still waited. But not all such dreams were gentle. The Vikings believed that the dead could be both kind and cruel. The ancestors might bless their descendants with protection and luck, or they might grow restless, jealous of the living, angry at the forgotten. When someone neglected the old burial mounds, when offerings were not made, when the dead were spoken of without reverence, that night dreams turned dark. The fire would die, a cold would creep into the house, and the dreamer would wake with the taste of earth in their mouth. In those dreams, the dead did not always appear as they were. Sometimes they came as ravens or deer, sometimes as pale children standing at the edge of the bed, sometimes only as voices, disembodied, echoing from beneath the floorboards, whispering your name again and again until you woke up gasping. To the Vikings, these were not nightmares. They were visits, uninvited perhaps, but meaningful. The Norse mind did not divide the sacred from the terrifying. The same dream that froze your blood might also save your life, because in their world, the gods and the dead used fear to speak clearly. A woman who dreamed of her dead mother might wake knowing when the next storm would strike. A man who saw his slain brother in his sleep might learn where an enemy waited, and if a warrior dreamed of his father calling him from across a river, he knew what that meant. The next battle would be his last. These were not coincidences to them. They were conversations, the soul remembering what the mind tried to forget. The Sagas tell of such dreams often. In the Gisli Saga, a man named Gisli has visions of a woman, sometimes fair, sometimes dark, who visits him before his death. One promises peace, the other warns of doom. He calls them his dream wives. And when he finally meets his end, he greets them calmly, as if old friends. Even death had etiquette. To the Vikings, the dead were not monsters, unless you gave them reason to be. They were ancestors, guides and witnesses. They carried the wisdom of the earth itself. To dream of them was to be reminded of your place in the chain of being. One link among countless others, glowing briefly before joining the rest. But there were rules. The dead were to be spoken of softly. Their minds were to be honoured with food, drink and song, and their presence in dreams was never to be mocked. Those who ignored the warnings often paid dearly. The Sagas tell of men who laughed at their dead visitors and were found lifeless days later, eyes open, mouths full of dirt. The message had been missed. The door between worlds does not like to be slammed. Still, for all the fear surrounding these encounters, there was also tenderness. When someone lost a child, they prayed to dream of them again, even for a single moment. When lovers were parted by war, they spoke to each other through dreams, sending thoughts like ships across the dark sea. There are stories of women who dreamed their husbands had died abroad, and when the news finally reached them weeks later, they wept without surprise. They had already said goodbye. Dreams were not fantasy, they were travel. Some said the soul left the body in sleep and visited the dead in their world. Others believed the dead came upward, through the ground, through the mist, to sit by the living for a while. Either way, contact was made. The Vikings called the grave mind Hugr, a place of stillness but also of power. Many believed that sleeping near one, or even lying atop it for a night, could bring dreams of the ancestor buried there. Warriors did this before voyages. Farmers did it before harvest. They wanted guidance. They wanted to know they were not alone. But it was never done lightly. You did not ask the dead for comfort. You waited for them to offer it. In one tale from the Bygja Saga, a group of settlers builds a hall near an ancient burial ground. Soon the dead begin to appear in their dreams, then in the hall itself. At first they only watched. Then they sit beside the living, silent and cold. The people flee in terror, abandoning the house. Only later do they realise the dead were not angry, they were lonely. The Vikings understood loneliness better than anyone. It haunted every winter, every frozen night, every voyage that never returned. So when the dead reached out, even in fearsome ways, it made sense, because to be forgotten was the worst death of all. And so each year, when the nights grew longest, they honoured the dead in ritual. The festival was called Yule. Yule, the old winter feast that predated Christmas. Families gathered in silence. They left food and ale on the table overnight for unseen guests. If the dishes were empty by morning, it meant the ancestors had visited and were pleased. Dreams that followed that night were considered sacred. They were messages of blessing, renewal, or warning for the year to come. Through this, the Vikings built a relationship with the dead that was intimate, almost familial. Death was not the end of conversation. It was only the beginning of a different kind of dialogue, one carried in silence, firelight, and dream. Even warriors found comfort in it. A man who died in battle was said to appear one last time in the dreams of those he loved, sometimes the same night, sometimes days later. He would stand at the doorway of their sleep whole and calm, saying nothing, and then vanish. It was his way of saying, "I made it." Such stories were not rare, they were part of daily life, woven into the way the Norse saw existence. To them, everything was alive. The mountain had a spirit, the river remembered, and the dead were simply another current flowing through that great river of being. The Völva taught that if you wanted to dream of a loved one, you should whisper their name before sleep and light a small flame beside your bed. The flame was a beacon. If the dream came, you would feel warmth in the chest and wake with tears. Not from fear, but from knowing that death was not absence, only distance. Even now, when we wake from a dream of someone long gone and feel that strange blend of grief and comfort, we touch the same truth the Vikings did, that something in us still listens for voices that should be silent, and perhaps they still speak. To dream of the dead was to remember that the past was not finished, that love did not end with the body, that the mind, when unshackled from waking, could reach across time itself. The Vikings never questioned this. They lived too close to the edge of the world to doubt that it could look back at them. So they honoured their dead not only with stones and songs, but with dreams. Each night was a pilgrimage, each dream a visitation. And when the dawn came, they did not say, "I dreamed of my father." They said, "He came to see me." The road north was endless, a ribbon of frozen earth between mountains and sea. For weeks the traveller had followed it, walking alone beneath skies that never brightened. The snow came and went, sometimes whispering, sometimes blinding, but always there, as if the world itself were breathing cold against him. He had left no one behind, no wife, no kin, no hearth to return to. Only a mound of stones beside the fjord, where his brother slept beneath the moss. He had promised to bring word of the sea, of what it looked like beyond the horizon. And so he walked. At night he slept beside his small fire, wrapped in sealskin and silence. Each evening he prayed not for warmth, but for a dream. And when it came, it was never the one he expected. In the dream he stood upon a black shore. The waves were still, too still. The air was thick as breath held too long. Far out across the water, something glowed faintly, like fire beneath ice. Then he heard a voice. It was not his brother's, nor any he knew. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper inside the bones. It said, "You are walking in the wrong direction." He tried to speak, but his voice made no sound. The water began to move, slow and deliberate, drawing toward him as if pulled by a great hand. He saw shapes beneath the surface, long, pale and shifting. They looked like fish at first, then faces. Eyes opened, hundreds of them, staring up through the ice water. The voice spoke again. "You cannot walk where the dead are waiting." He stumbled backward, but his feet sank into the sand like it was swallowing him. Then he saw a figure standing on the far shore, tall, cloaked, holding a staff. He couldn't see the face, but he knew who it was. Everyone did. Odin, the Wanderer. The god raised his staff and pointed it at the traveller. The sea between them turned to glass. Inside it, the traveller saw his own reflection, but older, scarred and smiling. Then the glass shattered, and he woke. The fire beside him had gone out. Only embers glowed in the dark. Snow had covered his blanket. His body ached as though he'd walked miles in his sleep. For a long time, He sat staring at the coals, trying to steady his breath. He felt no fear, only the strange calm that comes after knowing something irreversible. He packed his few things, stood, and turned back the way he had come. The mountains were black shapes against the grey sky. The sea was somewhere behind them, invisible but waiting. He knew without knowing how that he would not see it again in this life. The dream had changed him. It had told him that the journey was not outward, but inward, that the road he sought was made of memory, not earth. He began to hum an old song, one his brother used to sing while carving oars by the fire. It was a song about sailing beyond sight, about finding home in the wind. The sound echoed against the frozen air, a single human note in a world of stone. By nightfall he reached the mound where his brother lay. He knelt beside it, brushing away the snow until the carved runes showed through. He dreamed of the sea. The traveller smiled faintly. He lay down beside the mound, his hand resting on the stones. The cold seeped through his skin, but it no longer felt cruel. He closed his eyes, and somewhere between waking and sleep he heard the sea again, not near, but inside him, vast and endless. The voice returned, softer this time. Now you are walking the right way. The wind rose and the stars flickered, and in the silent field of snow, a man and his dream both disappeared into the horizon, one becoming the other. Every Viking warrior knew this truth. Before every battle, there was another war, the one that happened in sleep. The night before blood was spilled, dreams came heavy and wild. Faces burned in the firelight. Wolves howled inside the skull, and in the darkness behind the eyelids something stirred. Something ancient, patient, watching. They called it Odin's breath. It was said that before great raids, the All-Father walked among the sleeping warriors, invisible, whispering through their dreams. He gave visions, not comfort, not peace, but sight. He showed them flashes of the coming day, the clash of iron, the screams of men, the exact moment their lives would end. Those who saw too much were never the same. Those who saw nothing envied them, because for a Viking a dream before battle was a mark, proof that Odin had noticed you. He had looked your way, and whether that meant victory or death no longer mattered. To be seen by a god was to be chosen, but the price was high. The Sagas tell of warriors who woke before dawn with shaking hands, muttering of beasts and burning ships, their eyes glassy, as if they were already half dead. They called it battle sleep, the liminal state between man and monster. Once you entered it, you could not return untouched. To dream of battle was to live it twice. In the dream you could see yourself fighting, dying, killing, over and over, sometimes from above as though your soul hovered above your body, sometimes from within, feeling the weight of the axe, the warmth of blood on your skin. When you finally woke, your heart still raced, your throat tasted of iron, and you understood something terrible, that what you dreamed was not imagination, it was memory, borrowed from the future. The Vikings believed time was not a line, but a web. Fate, weird, had already been woven. Dreams were simply the moments when the soul caught a glimpse of the tapestry. You couldn't change what you saw. You could only prepare yourself to meet it. Many warriors prayed for such dreams. They wanted to know, because fear grew from uncertainty, not death itself. A man who dreamed of his own fall on the battlefield could fight more freely. He had already seen the end. He had nothing left to lose. Others weren't so lucky. They dreamed of endless running, of screams they couldn't place, of fire consuming everything. They woke trembling, cursed by knowledge too vague to escape. In the morning when the army assembled, those who had dreamed would speak their visions aloud. If a raven had flown in the dream, it was good, Odin's sign. If the sea had turned black, bad, the goddess Ran was waiting to take the drowned. If they dreamed of wolves feeding, it meant slaughter. And still, they marched. Because fear too was a kind of devotion. There were men known as berserkers, the bear shirts, who entered a frenzy so deep it blurred the line between dream and waking. Before battle, they often fell into trances. Eyes rolled back, bodies shaking, mouths foaming. They saw things no one else saw. Gods towering over the field, rivers of light pouring from the sky, their ancestors standing shoulder to shoulder with them. Some said they consumed herbs or mushrooms to reach that state. Others said it was pure divine possession. Whatever it was, the berserker did not fight for victory. He fought to merge with something beyond himself, to become a vessel of the storm. And when the trance broke, when silence returned, he could not remember what he had done. Only fragments, only flashes of red and roaring. Sleep after battle was worse. They would collapse by the fires, surrounded by corpses, and the dreams would come again, louder now. The faces of those they killed would return, silent, staring. Some called their names, some simply watched, and the warrior would thrash in his sleep, muttering apologies, promises, or prayers no one could understand. Others never woke at all. Their bodies breathed, but their souls stayed on the field. Their comrades would find them cold in the morning, eyes open, staring at something far away. The wise said Odin had taken them, claimed them through their dreams rather than their wounds. To the Vikings this made sense. Odin was the god of both poetry and madness, both inspiration and death. He walked the same road as the dreamers. He understood that knowledge and terror were brothers. It's no accident that many of his chosen, the berserkers, the seers, the poets, were haunted men. They saw too deeply. They lived half in the world, half in vision. In the Ynglinga saga, it's written that Odin could send his spirit forth while his body slept, travelling through worlds like smoke, speaking to the dead and learning their secrets. He could also send nightmares into the minds of others, killing them in their sleep. The Vikings took this literally. They believed dreams could be wounded, that the gods fought wars through the visions of men, and sometimes men learned to fight back. There were warriors who claimed they could shape their own dreams, guide their souls in the night like ships. Before battle, they would lie down and picture victory. They would summon visions of strength, call their ancestors, see the enemy already falling. And when morning came, they fought as if they had already won. Because in a sense, they had. They had fought the battle once already. In the mind, in the dream. But the line between power and madness was thin. Some became addicted to those visions, seeking them even in peace, drinking herbs or chanting to return to that state of fury and fire. They could not bear the quiet. They needed the dream to feel alive. And when the dream didn't come, they withered. Others grew terrified of sleep altogether, because every time they closed their eyes they saw blood again, not in memory, but in repetition. The gods had marked them, and the dreams would never release them. Many sagas describe such men, warriors who wandered alone, muttering, eyes distant. Their souls, people said, had been stretched thin between worlds. They were dream-broken. The modern mind might call it trauma. The Vikings called it Odin's gift, because to suffer the visions of war was to walk the same road as the god himself, the road of sacrifice, wisdom, and eternal unrest. When these men slept, they did not rest. They trained. They died again and again, learning to let go of fear, of pity, of self, until finally there was nothing left but the fight. Pure, burning, endless. And in that void they found something sacred. They said that when a warrior dreamed of falling and did not flinch, he had conquered death. That was the moment Odin smiled. That was when a man became more than mortal. But those who never dreamed before battle were pitied, because it meant the gods had turned their faces away. To die without a dream was to die forgotten. To die with one was to die illuminated. That's why even the fiercest fighters carried charms for sleep. Small runes of protection, amulets blessed by the Völva. They didn't pray for victory, they prayed for dreams, because in dreams they met the truth of who they were, and who they would become. To a Viking, courage did not begin on the battlefield. It began the night before, under the firs, when the fire dimmed and the air grew still. That was when the real battle began, the war against the self. They knew that if you could face your death in a dream, You could face it anywhere, and so they slept, trembling, sweating, whispering the names of gods, waiting for the visions that would claim them. Some saw Valkyries descending on wings of smoke. Some saw black ships drifting through the stars. Some saw nothing but silence, and woke with tears, knowing their time was near. When dawn came, they rose without fear, because the night had already killed them once, and to die twice was no tragedy. The field awaited, and beyond it, the hall of the slain. The songs promised that in Valhalla there was no pain, no exhaustion, only endless feasting, endless glory. But maybe deep down, they knew it was just another dream. The final one. And maybe that was enough. Because even if the afterlife was only the mind's last illusion, it was a beautiful one. A warrior's reward for facing the dark with open eyes. So when the horn sounded and the long line of men began to move, no one spoke of fear. They spoke of what they had seen in sleep, the visions that guided their blades, the voices that whispered, "Now." The night before every battle, the North held its breath. Dreams spread across the land like frost, silent, inevitable, shimmering. And when morning broke, the warriors stepped into those dreams made real. They did not fight against death, they fought toward it, because death to them was only another awakening, another kind of dawn. Every dream has two tellers, the one who dreams and the one who interprets. For the Vikings, the second was always divine. For us, it is the mind itself. But the difference may not be as wide as we think. Modern science says that dreams are the brain's theatre, a place where emotion, memory, and survival instinct collide. In the Viking world, those same collisions happened under torchlight and snow, not beneath hospital lamps. Yet the result was the same. The human psyche, trying to understand what it had endured. Fear, after all, is ancient. It doesn't belong to any century. It belongs to the body. The Vikings lived in constant exposure to it. Cold that could kill, seas that swallowed fleets, raids that ended entire families overnight. To survive, their minds learned to practice danger even in rest. Their dreams were rehearsals for catastrophe. Today we call that the fight or flight imprint, the brain replaying threat to prepare for the next one. But to a Viking, that nightly rehearsal felt supernatural. When you dream of drowning, it is your mind rehearsing oxygen loss. When you dream of running, it is the body reminding itself that movement is survival. When you dream of death, it is the soul negotiating with fear. The sagas speak of dreams before storms, before battles, before betrayals. Each one, in psychological terms, is the nervous system running simulations. The difference is that the Norse didn't separate body from spirit. They saw the simulation as revelation. In their cosmology, the body is remembered through the gods. Every tremor, every chill, every nightmare had meaning, and maybe they were right. Because modern sleep research shows that the human brain replays trauma in loops, searching for resolution. Nightmares are the psyche's way of saying, "This still hurts." So when Vikings dreamed of blood, ice, or the dead, they were facing their own memories, encoded in mythic language, wrapped in story to make pain bearable. They didn't call it trauma, they called it prophecy. But prophecy and trauma share a rhythm. Both are glimpses of what cannot be changed. The Vikings' world trained their minds to live on that edge. Every sound at night could mean death. Every silence could hide an enemy. Their nervous systems were tuned to perpetual alertness. And in that tension, sleep became something holy, a controlled fall into vulnerability. That's why they built rituals around it. The fire at the centre of the Longhouse wasn't only warmth, it was the symbol of vigilance. The charms under the pillow, the runes on the wall. Early cognitive tools to tell the body, you are safe enough to dream. Modern psychology does the same with bedtime routines, with guided imagery, with controlled breathing. The Vikings use smoke and story. We use science and screens. Both are ways to negotiate with fear. If the Norse night was external, wolves, frost, spirits, ours is internal. Deadlines, loss, noise, anxiety. Different monsters, same mind. What fascinates psychologists today is how accurate those old interpretations were in metaphor. The Mara pressing on the chest mirrors the sensation of sleep paralysis, a physiological glitch. But describing it as a demon perfectly captures the experience's terror. The Draugr returning from the grave is what we might now call intrusive memory or survivor's guilt, the past refusing to stay buried. And the Völva's trance resembles what we'd describe as altered brainwave states, theta rhythms, dissociation, lucid dreaming. They spoke myth, we speak neurology. But we are describing the same landscape, the night inside the skull. Fear shapes that landscape. It is both architect and inhabitant. Without fear, dreams lose gravity. They become hollow. With too much of it, they become prisons. The Vikings found balance by giving fear a face, by naming it Mara, by burying it under ritual, by wrestling it into story. They externalised what we internalise, and because of that, they could live with it. There's a strange strength in imagining that your nightmare is not just chemical, but meaningful. It turns suffering into dialogue. It makes the unbearable survivable. That's the psychology beneath their myths. Fear given narrative becomes courage. A Viking who dreamed of drowning would build a stronger ship. A farmer who dreamed of famine would store more grain. A mother who dreamed of her dead child would pray harder, love fiercely, and keep the fire burning through the longest night. Dreams forced them to act. They were emotional instructions. Today, when psychologists study lucid dreamers, trauma survivors or soldiers, they find the same pattern. The mind returns to the scene of terror until it can rewrite the ending. In the Viking world, that rewriting happened through ritual. You told your dream to the Seeresses, to your kin, to the fire itself. You spoke it into safety. You gave it shape so it couldn't devour you from within. It was, unknowingly, an early form of therapy. The Norse worldview also softened the sting of death. When you believe that your ancestors watched through dreams, grief becomes participation, not isolation. The dead never truly leave, so loss never becomes despair. That belief gave psychological resilience to a culture built on hardship. It's why they could face endless winters and still sing. Their acceptance of fate, word, was not fatalism, but emotional intelligence. If everything is woven, then tragedy is not punishment, it is pattern. Acceptance transforms fear into focus. Modern stoicism, mindfulness, even exposure therapy echo that same ancient logic. Don't flee the dark. Enter it until it no longer owns you. When a Viking closed his eyes at night, he was performing a kind of exposure therapy, rehearsing death until it became familiar. That repetition built a species of calm that outsiders mistook for savagery. It wasn't savagery, it was understanding. Because when you live with the awareness that everything ends, fear becomes sacred. It teaches attention. It sharpens gratitude. Their dreams, though violent and strange, kept them alive. They reminded them of what was real. Breath, warmth, family, dawn. The nightmare was not an enemy. It was a teacher with claws. The Vikings believed courage was not found in the absence of fear, but in the ability to look directly at it, even when it wore your own face. That belief still echoes in modern therapy rooms, in every soldier's trembling sleep, in every human who wakes from darkness gasping and still dares to rise. We are not so different. We just use different languages for the same ghosts. Fear is the oldest god we know, and in every dream where we confront it, we perform the same ritual the Vikings did, dying a little, learning a little, and waking changed. That is the true psychology of the North, to walk through terror until it becomes wisdom. Once the night belonged to the soul, now it belongs to the clock. The Vikings knew a darkness we will never see again, a darkness complete, heavy, unbroken, where the stars felt close enough to touch and the mind could unfold without distraction. They slept not as escape, but as passage, a journey inward through myth, memory, and fear. Each night was a ceremony. We have forgotten that ceremony, In the modern world, darkness has become something to fight. We fill it with screens, streetlights and noise, pushing away the silence that once shaped the human spirit. Our rooms glow long after the sun sets. Our minds remain lit with unfinished tasks. We no longer descend into night. We hover just above it, afraid to fall. For the Vikings, night was not the opposite of day, it was the other half of life. They believed that wisdom, courage and peace all had roots in that darkness. Those dreams were not distractions, but the language of existence itself. The way the gods, the ancestors, and the inner self all spoke as one. But light has exiled them. In a world of constant brightness, the dream has lost its authority. We have replaced visions with images, silence with algorithms. The imagination, once vast and holy, now starves beneath artificial dawn. We no longer dream to understand. We dream to forget, if we manage to sleep at all. Modern life fractures the ancient rhythm. Where the Norse drifted naturally between waking and rest, modern humans compress their nights into hours stolen from exhaustion. Caffeine by day, screens by night. Our circadian gods were replaced by electric ones. The Vikings followed the sun and the seasons. They rose when the light rose, they slept when it vanished. In winter, that meant long hours beside the fire, wrapped in furs, breathing in unison, letting the mind stretch into the endless dark. They dreamed vividly, because they gave their dreams time to arrive. Today, most of us would not recognise the texture of that darkness. We live in half-light. Even our nights are thin, shallow, never deep enough to reach the places where the old voices waited. When researchers cut modern people off from artificial light, something remarkable happens. After several days, their bodies slip back into the ancient rhythm. 2 sleeps, with a period of waking in between. In that middle hour, the mind becomes calm, creative, meditative. It was during this watch of the night that Vikings likely told their dreams, tended the fire, and whispered to the gods. It was not insomnia, it was communion. We lost that when we lost the dark. Our ancestors faced fear and made meaning. We flee fear and feel empty. They interpreted their nightmares as messages. We dismiss ours as malfunctions, but the result is the same. We still wake breathless, sweating, haunted. Only now, we have no language for it. We have replaced symbols with symptoms. And yet, the body remembers. When modern people report dreams of drowning, falling, or being chased, they echo the same archetypes carved in Norse sagas. The same flood, the same beast, the same chase through snow. The imagery doesn't die because it's older than civilization. It belongs to the nervous system, the timeless theatre of survival. The Vikings respected that theatre. They didn't try to escape it. They built their myths around it. They sang of their nightmares, carved them into stone, told them to their children by firelight. They made fear into art, and in doing so, they disarmed it. Our modern refusal to dream deeply, to enter that night, is not progress. It's loss. Because when you stop listening to your dreams, you stop listening to the part of yourself that remembers how to live. In ancient sleep, the boundary between body and cosmos dissolved. The sound of the wind, the crack of the ice, the breathing of the house, all were part of the same organism. Dreams arose from that unity. Now we sleep alone, sealed off from the world by walls and glowing glass. We still dream, but the dreams feel smaller, fragmented, confused. They wander through cities instead of forests, through noise instead of silence. They search for the gods in places we've erased them. The Vikings feared their dreams because they understood their power. We ignore ours because we've forgotten it. But the result is the same. Fear remains. It just hides behind reason. We say we don't believe in omens, yet we check our screens for signs every morning. Numbers, notifications, headlines, prophecies in digital form. The mind still craves patterns. It still listens for meaning in the noise. That impulse never died. Only the language changed. If the Vikings returned now, they would find our sleepless world unbearable. The endless light, the artificial noise, the constant stimulation. It would look to them like a curse. They would see us not as awake, but as trapped, halfway between dream and day, never fully in either. Perhaps that's why our modern world feels so restless. We've forgotten how to descend. The Vikings understood that descent was necessary into darkness, into silence, into the strange terrain of sleep. That's where the soul recalibrates. That's where fear transforms into wisdom. We call their beliefs superstition, but they might have been practicing the oldest form of mental hygiene, giving the mind a place to empty itself, a ritual of surrender, a nightly cleansing by dream. Without it, we fill with static. Every ancient culture treated dreaming as communication. Only ours treats it as an error. But the body remembers what the culture forgets. That's why insomnia feels like exile, the sense of being denied something sacred. When we lose the dream world, we lose half of existence. We lose the bridge between what we know and what we feel. And that bridge once carried everything: love to the dead, courage to the fearful, prophecy to the lost. Now, when we close our eyes, we often fall into nothing. Not darkness, but absence. Sleep comes as collapse, not ceremony. Dreams come fragmented, faint, drowned out by the glare of the day we refuse to end. But somewhere inside us, the old memory stirs. The need for story, the hunger for silence, the instinct to listen to the dark. That instinct is ancient, older than language, older than fear. It waits in us like an ember. And when the lights finally go out, truly out, it wakes again. Perhaps that's why so many of us, even now, feel drawn to old myths, old nights, old fires. Something in us remembers what it felt like to dream in the cold, to hear the wind as voice, the dark as presence, the night as teacher. That is the lost world, not gone, only buried beneath too much light, waiting, as all old gods do, for us to close our eyes long enough to find it again. Death to the Vikings was not the end of sleep, it was its perfection. Every night of their lives had been a rehearsal for that final surrender, the one from which no dawn returned. They called it the last sleep, but they did not speak the word with fear. For them to die was to awaken in another realm. They had no single heaven or hell. Instead, there were many destinies, woven by the Norns, carried by the wind, chosen by the way one lived. The warrior might rise to Valhalla, Odin's hall, where he would feast and fight eternally, preparing for the end of the world. The farmer, the mother, the quiet soul might go to Fylgja, Freya's field, where peace and green light filled the air. Others went downward, not as punishment, but as return, into Helheim, the shadowed world ruled by the goddess Hel, where the dead rested in silence and memory. To the Viking mind, none of these places were far. They were all part of the same great cycle, the same dark river that flowed through every dream. So when a man died in his bed, his family spoke softly. They said he was sleeping deeper now. They closed his eyes as if tucking him in for the longest night. A sword was laid beside him, not as a weapon, but as a key, to cut through the veil between worlds. And in the moment between breath and stillness, they believed the soul saw things, visions no waking mind could bear. Some described it as a light like snow in sunlight, others as a road made of mist. Some said the ancestors appeared, calling from the other shore. And some said that Odin himself came, not as a god of war, but as a traveller in grey, offering his hand. These were not metaphors to them, they were reports from the edge. The old sagas speak of death dreams, moments when a dying person would speak of seeing ships waiting, horses saddled, halls open. Their voices would calm, their faces would grow peaceful. It was believed that, in that instant, they were crossing from one dream into another. The Vikings saw death as continuation, not collapse. The body fell, but the Hugr, the mind soul, carried on. Through forests of stars, across rivers of memory, into the company of the dead. Sleep had trained it for this. Every night, when the living surrendered consciousness, they practiced dying, and every morning when they woke, they practiced resurrection. That was the hidden theology of the North, not written in books, but lived through breath, fire, and frost. To them, eternity was not endless time. It was an endless cycle, light and dark, life and death, waking and sleep. The Völva said that those who dreamed deeply in life would dream gently in death, that the restless would wake confused on the other side, still searching for meaning, that only those who made peace with night could find peace beyond it. So the Vikings learned to befriend the dark. They didn't seek comfort in promises. They sought courage in acceptance. Because if death was only another dream, then the goal was not to avoid it, but to enter it well. That is why they buried their dead with care, with weapons, food, jewellery, horses, even pets. Not for wealth, but for familiarity. They wanted the soul to feel at home on its journey, and they believed that the first dream, after death, would mirror the last dream before it. There are stories of warriors who, on their final night, spoke of strange visions, of halls lit by fire that did not burn, of meadows where no wind blew, of mothers singing in a language they had never heard but somehow knew. Their families listened, tears shining in the fire, knowing what it meant. The gods were near. Even in death, fear was not banished. The Vikings did not pretend to be unafraid. They simply carried their fear with reverence. They saw in it the same awe that surrounded all sacred things. To die was to face the oldest mystery, and fear was the proof that you still honoured it. When a great warrior fell, the poets sang that his eyes remained open, watching the sky, waiting for the Valkyries to descend. But perhaps what they really meant was that he dreamed with his eyes still half open, caught between worlds, neither waking nor gone. The Norse word Hamr, dreamworld, is rarely used now, but it once described the place where souls travelled in sleep. It was neither above nor below, but within, and to reach it finally, through death, was to come home. The Vikings imagined the soul crossing the bridge Gjallabru, glowing with gold, spanning the river Gjöll, the boundary between life and death. A maiden named Modguda guarded it, asking each soul who they were and what they sought. If they answered truly, she let them pass. If they lied, they fell into the water, into the currents of forgetting. To them, truth was not about morality, it was about memory. You had to remember who you were to continue. That's why the dying were encouraged to speak their names aloud, to anchor their souls in identity before the dark took them. In that final moment, they believed the self unfolded like a scroll. Every joy, every sin, every act replayed as the mind crossed into eternity. It was not judgment, it was recognition. And then, silence. The Vikings did not describe heaven as endless praise, nor hell as torment. They described it as rest, true rest, the kind no living person could know. The end of struggle, the quieting of thought, the long exhale after a life of storms. That was their paradise, peace after endurance. To them it was not pleasure that redeemed life, it was completion. Even their gods would one day die. Ragnarök was not a tragedy, it was fulfillment. The dream concluding exactly as foretold. Everything that begins must end. Everything that ends returns. That was the Viking gospel. And perhaps that is why their stories still speak to us, because deep down, we too sense that rest and death are not enemies. We spend our lives running from exhaustion, from silence, from stillness. Yet these were the very things the North embraced. They made peace with what we still resist. When a Viking looked at the night sky, he didn't see emptiness. He saw the spirits of the dead, stars as souls burning through eternity, reminders that every dreamer becomes part of the heavens they once feared. To sleep was to touch them, to dream was to visit them, and to die was to join them. In their world, there was no loneliness in death, only reunion, no endless punishment, only transformation. The soul was wind, the wind was story, and the story never dies. When the last fire in the Longhouse burned low, when breath misted into stillness, when the frost began to claim the roof beams, that was not the end. It was simply another beginning whispered back into the dark. And so, each night, when they closed their eyes, they practiced that final passage. They surrendered to the unknown, trusting that what awaited them would be the same as it had always been, the long road through darkness, guided by flame. To them, life was the brief dream between two great sleeps. And perhaps they were right, because when you listen closely, in the stillness before dawn, when the world forgets to make noise, you can almost feel it. That old rhythm beneath everything, slow and patient, breathing through you. The rhythm that says you have slept before, you will sleep again. And none of it is to be feared. So what did the Vikings truly fear? Not death, not the dark, but the moment before both, the surrender. Every night they faced it willingly. They let their breaths slow, their bodies cool, their minds fall into the black sea of the unknown. And they called that bravery sleep. To them, courage wasn't the roar of battle. It was the quiet acceptance of night. The understanding that even fear has purpose, that even dreams have teeth. We spend our lives running from silence. They built their lives inside it. And maybe that's why in the end, they slept better than any people in history. Because they didn't fight the dark. They listened to it. They dreamed not for comfort, but for truth. Not for escape, but for revelation. Their nightmares were sacred because they reminded them of what it meant to be human, fragile, haunted, and yet unbroken. And when the last dawn came, when their bodies gave in to frost or blade or time, they didn't close their eyes in fear. They simply let go, as they had done 1,000 times before. One more dream, one more passage, one more night. In that way they were free, because the truest courage is not to conquer fear, but to sleep beside it, knowing it will never truly leave, and choosing rest anyway. And maybe that's the lesson the Vikings left us, that the night is not our enemy, it is our oldest teacher, our mirror, our inheritance. If you listen closely tonight, when the world finally quiets, when even the hum of your own thoughts fades, you might hear what they heard, the wind breathing like an ancestor, the dark humming like memory, and somewhere in it all, the whisper of every dream that ever was. Rest, traveller of the north. You've walked far enough for one day. The fire is low, the sky is endless, and the old gods are still watching. Close your eyes. You'll find them waiting in the dark. If this story stirred something in you, keep the fire alive. Subscribe to Viking Times and return with us to the old world of frost, fear, and forgotten wisdom. Tell us in the comments, which city's night are you watching from? And until the next saga, rest well, traveller. The North remembers.